From afar, Chicago always looks beautiful. Glass buildings tower, streetlights shine like stars on Earth, and the river that cuts through the city sparkles in the nightlights. But up close, behind the curtains of the fancy offices and the smiles of the executives, there are dark secrets that never appear in the annual reports. Secrets that can ruin careers, destroy families, and even send people to prison. 32-year-old Marcus Reed knows this all too well. He's just an ordinary employee at a large financial firm called the Halcyon Group. But for the past few weeks, he's felt as if he's standing on the edge of a cliff. Marcus was born and raised on Chicago's South Side, a tough but colorful neighborhood. His father was a city bus driver, his mother a nurse at a public hospital. Their life was simple: a small house with peeling paint, the sound of police sirens almost every night, and the smell of cornbread from the small shop down the street. From a young age, Marcus learned one important lesson. Black people like him couldn't make big mistakes. His father often said, "You have to work twice as hard just to stand on equal footing, and one mistake can erase all your hard work." Those words stuck in his head. While his friends were falling into the streets, Marcus chose books and numbers. He studied accounting, graduated with a scholarship, and then got a job at the Halcyon Group, a prestigious financial firm with towering offices in downtown Chicago. For Marcus, sitting at his air-conditioned office desk in a crisp suit was proof that he had broken through boundaries that once seemed impossible. But he also knew, behind the executive's smiles, there was always something he shouldn't ask about. Every morning, Marcus arrived early. He loved walking the long, dark blue carpeted corridors, listening to the echoing sound of leather shoes, then sitting at his desk with a cup of black coffee. The office was bustling, filled with computer screens displaying graphs, phones ringing incessantly, and the scent of expensive perfume mingled with the scent of fresh paper from the printer. In that room, there were hundreds of people, but only a handful had real power. One of them was Victoria Hale. Victoria, VP of Finance, was a constant eye-catcher. A 47-year-old white woman, her blonde hair always perfectly styled, her black suits expensively cut, and her smile capable of convincing billion-dollar investors. However, to staffers like Marcus, Victoria was a frightening presence. She spoke curtly, coldly, with no room for questions. Everyone knew one unspoken rule: never make her uncomfortable. Among the stiff faces in the office, there was one figure who made Marcus feel a little more human: Clara Jennings. 29, with short blonde hair, full of energy and curiosity, Clara often joked lightly, brought Marcus extra coffee, or simply asked him questions. She came from a middle-class family in the Chicago suburbs and had a much more relaxed outlook on the world than Marcus. Clara didn't know what big secret lurked behind Marcus's computer screen, but she could see something in her colleague's face: anxiety. One busy afternoon, as the printer hummed and the keyboard clattered, an email arrived in Marcus's inbox. Sender: Halcyon Vendors, admin@halcyonvendors.com. Subject: Invoice number 8893. Payment required, $250,000. Marcus opened the attachment. It was a neat invoice, with the logo of a foreign company he'd never heard of. The address was obscured, the account number from an offshore bank. It all looked official, but also suspicious. Marcus searched the database. There was no record of this vendor, no contract, no legal agreement, nothing. His face tensed. In the world of finance, something like this wasn't just negligence, it was a red flag. Clara glanced across the table, noticing Marcus lingering in front of the screen for too long. "Everything okay?" she asked lightly. Marcus smiled faintly and closed the screen. "Yeah, just invoices." But deep down he knew something was wrong. That afternoon, after an internal meeting, Marcus mustered up the courage to ask Victoria. He knocked on the door of her spacious office with its large windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. About this vendor, Halcyon Vendors, do we have a record of... Victoria didn't let him finish her sentence. She looked at him with a thin, unwarm smile. Don't worry, Marcus. Just process it. These are executive-level decisions. Marcus fell silent. The sentence sounded like a door closing. There was no room for discussion, no room for objection. He nodded, pretending to understand, then returned to his desk. But his mind was racing. That evening, when most of the employees had gone home, Marcus was still sitting in front of his computer. The office lights had begun to dim, the air conditioner hummed softly, and the laptop screen shone brightly in his face. He opened the emails again. Then, one by one, he copied them into a private folder. A folder only he knew, locked with a long password and stored on a small flash drive he always took home. It was an old habit of his, a paranoia he inherited from life experience, and now it's a lifesaver. Marcus stared at the flash drive for a long moment before tucking it into his jacket pocket. At the time, he didn't realize how valuable the small object was. A few weeks passed and similar emails arrived more frequently. The amounts grew larger, $400,000, $600,000, even more. Marcus felt his breath grow tighter with each invoice. Until one afternoon, Victoria called him again. The room was silent. The evening light streamed in from the large window, reflecting an orange glow on the glass of the work desk. Victoria stood up straight, stared out, then turned around with a cold expression. "Marcus?" Her voice was low but firm. "We need to clean up the system. Delete all the emails related to Halcyon Vendors. Today." Marcus felt his heart stop for a moment. He stared at Victoria, trying to read her face. But all he saw was the arrogance of a woman used to making her own rules. "This is not a request," Victoria added more sharply. Marcus walked out of the room with heavy steps. His hands trembled slightly. He knew exactly what the order meant: to destroy the evidence. In the long, quiet corridor, Marcus clutched the small flash drive in his jacket pocket. A decision had to be made. Deleting it would mean he was partly to blame. Refusing to do so would mean the end of his career. Inside him, a small voice said, "Save it, just in case." That night, in the quiet office, Marcus sat alone. Only the sound of the air conditioner kept him company. He opened the emails again, then one by one, he archived them all. Thousands of messages, invoices, internal conversations. He saved them all. He secured them all. As he closed his laptop and stared at the sparkling lights of Chicago in the distance, Marcus knew one thing. His life had just changed forever. Every lie has a trail, and that trail is always waiting for the right moment to surface. Ever since Victoria ordered Marcus to delete the fictitious vendor's emails, the office routine had never been the same. In the open-plan, glass-walled office, employees were busy typing, printers hummed, and phones rang incessantly. The atmosphere seemed normal, but for Marcus, every step felt heavy. He knew there was a ticking time bomb. Every time his computer screen pinged with a new email notification, Marcus felt his chest tighten. And sure enough, the invoices from Halcyon Vendors kept coming in. They were bigger, bolder. Clara had noticed a change in Marcus's demeanor several times. Normally, he was calm, always focused on his work. But now he often seemed fidgety, tapping his pen in his hand or staring at the screen for too long. One morning, Clara approached him. "Marcus, are you okay? You've been distant." Marcus turned his head, trying to smile. "Just work. Tough deadlines?" He nodded, forcing a calm look. "Yeah, something like that." But Clara's eyes were sharp. He could sense something was being left unsaid. Meanwhile, Victoria increasingly called Marcus into her office. Every time the glass door closed, Marcus felt like he was in an interrogation room. One afternoon, as the sun cast an orange glow off the walls of Chicago buildings, Victoria stared at Marcus with a cold expression. "Marcus, I trust you understand the importance of discretion." "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied, keeping his voice calm. "Good, because if anyone decides to dig into this, it could cost lives, careers, everything." Marcus swallowed. The words "cost lives" sounded more like a threat than a warning. Then Victoria closed her laptop and leaned forward. "You're a smart man. Don't ask questions you don't need answers to." Marcus left, his heart pounding. Every word Victoria said felt like a noose closing in. Marcus's nights were now filled with anxiety. In his modest South Side apartment, he sat alone with the lights dimmed, staring at a small flash drive containing thousands of archived emails. He asked himself, "Am I crazy? Should I really delete all this?" But then he remembered his father's face. He remembered the old advice. "Never be a party to anything dirty, son. If you know something is wrong and you don't say anything, you're not just a witness, you're a part of it." That's what kept him from saving all the evidence. But paranoia began to grow. He felt someone was watching him. He felt Clara was watching him too long, or Victoria was mentioning his name in meetings too often. One afternoon, Clara approached Marcus's desk with 2 cups of coffee. "You need this," she said, handing him a glass. Marcus smiled faintly. "Thanks." Clara sat on the edge of his desk, staring straight at him. "You've been different. Something's going on. And don't tell me it's just deadlines. I know you better than that." Marcus fell silent. The sounds of printers, keyboards, and phones grew louder around him. Finally, he simply replied quietly, "Sometimes it's better not to know." That sentence made Clara freeze for a moment. She didn't fully understand, but enough to know Marcus was hiding something big. A few weeks later, whispers began to circulate in the office. There was news that someone in the finance team had processed unclear vendor payments. The amount was in the millions of dollars. Marcus overheard the gossip in the pantry. 2 employees were talking while pouring coffee. "Did you hear? Some vendor payments don't match the records." "Yeah, I heard the auditors are sniffing around. Someone's in deep trouble." Marcus looked down, pretending to be busy with his coffee, but cold sweat was running down his back. One morning, Marcus arrived early. The office was still quiet. He sat at his desk, turned on his computer, and stared at the blank screen. He knew time was running out. An internal investigation would surely begin soon, and when it did, he would be on the front lines. Suddenly, the sound of high heels approached. It was Victoria. "Marcus." Her voice was calm but piercing. "I need you in my office." The room felt colder than usual. Victoria stared at Marcus sharply. "There are rumors. People are asking questions. If anyone comes to you, you say nothing. Understand?" Marcus tried to answer, but his voice was hoarse. "What if—" Victoria cut him off immediately, her tone like a knife. "There are no what-ifs. You do your job. You stay quiet. That's the only way you survive here." She stared at Marcus for a long moment, as if emphasizing the threat. Then she smiled faintly, a smile that never touched her eyes. Good talk. The following days were hellish. The internal audit team was in full swing. Clara was increasingly curious, watching Marcus's every move. And outside the building, rumors were circulating that federal regulators were beginning to take notice of the Halcyon Group. Marcus now stood in the eye of the storm. On one side, Victoria with her threats. On the other, his screaming conscience. And in his jacket pocket, a small flash drive that held the truth and possibly the death sentence for his career. Every lie was like cracked glass. From the outside, it might appear intact, shiny, reflecting light. But beneath it, tiny cracks were already there, waiting for enough light to reveal them. And when that light finally came, nothing could stop the collapse. That morning, the atmosphere at the Halcyon Group office was far different from usual. There were no chuckles in the pantry, no casual greetings across desks. All that could be heard was the rapid click of keyboards, as if everyone was being chased by something unseen. In the main quarter on the 30th floor, a group of men and women in gray suits walked briskly, carrying thick folders and laptops. They were not guests. They were the internal audit team. Marcus watched them pass his desk. His heart pounded faster than usual. He knew this was the beginning of something bigger than himself. A senior auditor, a cold-faced man named Richard Malone, paused briefly in front of the finance team. In a firm voice, he said, "We'll need to review all vendor payments from the last 18 months, effective immediately." Everyone pretended to be busy looking down at their screens, but Marcus could feel Richard's sharp gaze lingering longer than necessary, as if he were holding something back. That night, in his small apartment, Marcus sat at the dining table, piled high with paperwork. He placed the black flash drive on the table, small but heavy, as if it held a bomb that could devastate his career, even his life. His hands trembled as he touched it. Will I use this? Or will it be buried with their lies? He remembered his father, who always said that integrity was the only legacy that could not be stolen. He remembered Clara, who had looked at him questioningly several times. And of course, he remembered Victoria, with her cold smile and faint threat still echoing in his ears. Clara had actually sensed something was off for a long time. Marcus was often silent, his gaze blank as he stared at the screen, his shoulders tense as if carrying an invisible weight. One afternoon, when the office was starting to quiet down, Clara approached him. In a soft but serious tone, she said, "Marcus, listen. I don't know what's going on, but something's wrong. You don't have to tell me everything, but don't let them destroy you." Marcus sighed, his eyes not moving from the screen. Then, in a barely audible voice, he replied, "Sometimes silence is the only shield." Clara only briefly held his arm before leaving, but she knew that whatever Marcus was hiding, it was profound. Meanwhile, Victoria Hale clearly sensed the approaching wave. She was holding increasingly frequent closed-door meetings with executives, her voice sounding sharper than usual. One afternoon, she summoned Marcus to her office. The spacious room with floor-to-ceiling windows was filled with bright light from the midday sun, but Victoria's aura remained cold. "Marcus," she said, tidying up files, "you've been with me long enough. You know how things work. People come asking questions. You give them what they need to hear, not what they want to find." Marcus ventured to ask, his voice hesitant, "And if I can't?" Victoria paused, then fixed him with a piercing, piercing gaze. She leaned in, her voice low but threatening. "Then you won't last here. Or anywhere else." Marcus looked down, feeling the threat creep into his bones. A few weeks later, the situation changed drastically. Not only were internal auditors arriving, but federal regulators began to intervene. That morning, from the main lobby of the Halcyon building, a group of men and women in black suits entered with official badges on their chests. SEC, FBI. Employees turned, whispering, "Is that the feds? Oh my God, this is real." Their steps were steady, their faces cold, and without further ado, they headed for the large conference room. The door slammed shut. Everyone knew the storm was here. Marcus was summoned a few days later. The room was cold and simple, with only a long table, 3 investigators, and a recorder in the center. One of the FBI agents, a black man named Agent Donovan, stared at Marcus with sharp but calm eyes. "Mr. Reed, we need your full cooperation. This isn't about protecting anyone. It's about the truth." Marcus swallowed, his voice trembling. "Am I under suspicion?" An SEC investigator, a white woman named Elaine Porter, replied curtly, "Not yet, but that depends on what you tell us." There was a long silence. Marcus felt every second like needles pricking his skin. Finally, with trembling hands, he reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out the black flash drive. He placed it on the table. "This is everything," he said hoarsely. Agent Donovan took the flash drive and stared at Marcus for a moment. Then he said firmly but appreciatively, "You did the right thing." The following days were hell for Victoria. In emergency meetings, she tried to hold her ground, her voice steady. "This is a misunderstanding. These were authorized executive transactions." But when investigators projected the emails on a large screen, emails she herself had written, all her defenses crumbled. Instructions to delete, orders to cover up, even threats to staff, all were clearly visible. The room fell silent. The other executives looked down, pretending to be busy with paperwork. Marcus sat in the back seat, watching. For the first time, he saw Victoria lose control. Her cold smile cracked, her eyes restless, her hands gripping the chair. That night, Marcus returned to his apartment. He stood by the window, staring at the twinkling lights of Chicago in the distance. His feelings were mixed: relief, fear, emptiness. He knew that tomorrow, everything would change. Victoria's name would be all over the news, the company would be shaken. And himself? Maybe he would remain just another employee, but at least he would no longer be part of the lie. The phone rang. It was Clara. Her voice was filled with emotion. "Marcus, I don't know what you did, but I think you just saved us all." Marcus smiled faintly, though his eyes were glistening with tears. "Maybe, or maybe I just finally did what was right." And for the first time in a long time, Marcus felt a heavy weight lift from his shoulders. But he also knew this wasn't the end. The storm was still swirling, and he now stood in the center of it, no longer a victim, but a key witness to a truth that could no longer be hidden. Victoria Hale's last day at the Halcyon Group building began with clear skies. Ironically, the sunlight streaming through the large office windows seemed like a final glimpse for a woman who had stood as a symbol of power for years. The office was quiet that morning. There were no jokes in the pantry, no friendly greetings in the elevator. All eyes were downcast as Victoria walked through the hallways at a brisk pace, her heels clicking loudly on the marble floor. This time, there was none of her usual air of confidence. Only a nervous look and a thin, forced smile remained. In the large conference room, the investigative team was waiting. Agent Donovan stood in his dark suit, his face calm but his eyes powerful. Elaine Porter sat with an open folder, pen in hand, ready to jot down every word. Richard Malone, the auditor, leaned back with folded arms, staring at Victoria impassively. "Ms. Hale," Donovan's voice broke the silence, "we've completed our review. The evidence is overwhelming." Victoria smiled coldly, trying to hold her ground. Evidence can be misleading. Context matters. But the projector was on, and the large screen reflected a stream of emails, deletion instructions, payment manipulation notes, threats to staff. All the electronic signatures were clearly visible. Every word was a noose around her own neck. The other executives sat stiffly in their chairs, some averting her gaze, others looking relieved that they hadn't been caught. Clara, who had been invited as an additional witness, sat in the corner of the room. Her eyes shifted from the screen to Marcus, who was now sitting straighter. For Clara, this was the moment the truth truly broke through all the lies that had filled the suffocating air of the office. Victoria stood, her voice rising. "This is absurd. I've built this company. None of you would be here without me." Her hands shook as she pointed at the screen, then at Donovan. "This is a witch hunt." Donovan didn't flinch. In a flat but firm tone, he said, "No, Ms. Hale, this is justice." Two other agents entered the room. With determined steps, they approached Victoria. One of them pulled out a pair of handcuffs. A muffled gasp arose from several people in the room. Victoria tried to back away, but there was nowhere to run. Her hands were pulled, the metallic sound of the handcuffs ringing distinctly, echoing in the silent room. Marcus stared at her. For the first time, he saw her not as an untouchable, controlling figure, but as a human being who had finally succumbed to the consequences. There was relief, but also bitterness. Part of him still couldn't believe it was really over. The news spread quickly. The media waited in front of the building, cameras lined up, microphones pointed. "Victoria Hale, CEO of Halcyon Group, arrested on charges of fraud and obstruction of justice," shouted one reporter. Employees watched from behind glass windows. Some whispered, some breathed a sigh of relief, and others looked fearful for the company's future. Halcyon, once proud, was now shaken, its reputation destroyed overnight. Marcus exited the building through a side door. He didn't want the media spotlight. He just wanted to go home. In his hand was a small briefcase containing the personal documents he had packed that morning. As he stepped onto the sidewalk, Clara approached him. Her smile was small but sincere. "You did it," she said simply. Marcus looked at her, then smiled faintly. "No, Clara, we did it," by not looking away. They stood in silence for a few seconds, the Chicago breeze blowing Clara's blonde hair, while Marcus's eyes drifted off into the distance. For the first time, he felt the weight that had weighed him down for months slowly lift. Months later, the city was as busy as ever. Towering buildings, streetlights flickered as night fell. Halcyon Group still stood, albeit with new management and a reputation that would take a long time to recover. Marcus Reed no longer worked there. He chose to resign, despite many advising him to stay. For him, a fresh start meant more than holding on to a scarred company. In a small cafe on the outskirts of town, Marcus sat alone with a cup of black coffee. He had a notebook in his hand, jotting something down. Pausing for a moment, he gazed out the window, watching children playing on the sidewalk, people walking briskly, and the afternoon sun beginning to set. Integrity, he thought, wasn't a gift, it was a choice, and choices always have a price. His phone vibrated. It was a message from Clara. "Hey, are you free for dinner tonight?" Marcus smiled, typing a short reply. "Yes, see you." He closed his notebook and took a final sip of coffee. His face was tired, but also peaceful. He knew the path he had chosen wasn't easy, but he also knew he had done the right thing. And sometimes that alone is enough to keep one's head held high. The sun set behind the buildings of Chicago. The streets were bustling, horns honking, but inside, Marcus felt a calm he'd never felt before. This story wasn't about the downfall of a powerful woman, but about the courage of an ordinary man who chose not to be silent. And in a world full of noise, sometimes the most precious voices are the ones that dare to emerge from the silence.